I'm torching the bridge or any concept of a bridge ever. But like, bridge is totally burned.
What I remember well is high-level ideas. That's just how my brain works, for better or for worse.
Okay, if this is the case, don't waste your time studying history, and don't pretend to study history, because you're not learning history at that point. The history is a collection of names and dates and places, and then a chronology and a story that relates these in some way. It could relate them through wars or diplomacy or marriages or domestic conflict. Or economics or trade. There's a million ways, or religious. It's impossible to say, I studied the history of some region and I just took a high-level idea away from it. What high-level idea? What does that even mean? You're not studying history at that point. I don't even know if that would count as philosophy. I don't understand what this means. When I study the history of a region, I don't remember any of the names, dates, places, or events. I just take away high-level ideas. What, like war is bad? That people can be greedy sometimes?
Thank you for listening to this conversation with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And now, let me answer some questions and try to reflect on and articulate some things I've been thinking about. If you would like to submit questions, including in audio and video form, go to lexfriedman.com/AMA, or to contact me for whatever other reason, go to lexfriedman.com/contact.
I've heard the Ukrainians, even in the eastern Russian-speaking areas, have generally turned away from Russia since they invaded in 2014. Yeah, it's not like a ton of them wanted to leave or anything. I'm just saying that of anybody that was even going to be remotely warmer to Russia, it's going to be people in the east.
First, I got a bunch of questions about this. So let me chat about the topic of language and, let's say, the mechanics of multilingual conversation. Perhaps the details are interesting to some people. It also allows me to reflect back on the puzzle of it in this episode and what I can do better next time. I already explained in the intro the symbolic, historic, and geopolitical complexity of the choice of language in the conversation with President Zelensky. As I said, the Russian language is one that the president speaks fluently and was his primary language for most of his life. I speak Russian fluently as well. It's the only common language we are both fluent in. So any other combination of languages required an interpreter, including when I spoke English. He did need an interpreter when I spoke English. And just like I was visibly encumbered and annoyed by the process of interpretation. This is why I try to speak in Russian to the president instead of English, so that he can directly understand me without an interpreter. I'm willing to take the hit for that, as I am for everything else. I'm not trying to protect myself. I'm trying to do whatever is best for the conversation, for understanding. Though it has been getting harder and harder to stay open, vulnerable, and raw in public, while the swarms of chanting internet mobs stop by with their torches and their color-coded hats, flags, frogs, pronouns, and hashtags. Anyway, there is a lot of nuanced aspects of the conversational language that I would like to explain here. I'll try to be brief. I can recommend a lot of books on this topic of language and communication that reveal just how amazing this technology of language is. For example, for a good overview, I recommend John McWhorter's books, and especially his lecture series for the great courses on language. There are several. In the Story of Human Language series, he gives a great discussion on spoken language versus written language, and that spoken language often relaxes the rules of communication. It uses shorter packets of words, loads in a bunch of subtle cues and meanings, all of which, like I'm trying to describe, are lost when there's an interpreter in the loop. Let me also describe some relevant characteristics of my peculiar language abilities, in quotes.
While this is true, it's better to have an interpreter if you're not very fluent or comfortable in the language. But
I was never good at speaking. I listen, think, and understand better than I speak. For me, this is true for both English and Russian, but it is especially true for Russian. The Russian language allows for much more room for wit, non-standard turns of phrase, metaphors, humor, rhyme, musicality, and, let's say, deforming of words that create a lot of room for creativity in how meaning and emotion are conveyed. You can do this for much English good at speaking. Of my peculiar language abilities, in quotes, I was never good at speaking. I listen, think, and understand better than I speak. For me, this is true for both English and Russian, but it is especially true for Russian. The Russian language allows for much more room for wit, non-standard turns of phrase, metaphors, humor, rhyme, musicality, and, let's say...
How? What? I just don't even believe this. I don't think it's even true, but okay.
Deforming of words that create a lot of room for creativity in how meaning and emotion are conveyed. You can do the same in English, but it's harder. I actually find that Brits are sometimes very good at this. Like, one of my favorite humans to talk to is Douglas Murray. Setting the content of the conversation aside, the sheer linguistic brilliance and wit of dialogue, who Douglas is a journey in itself. I think Christopher Hitchens had the same, and many others. Like I said, especially Brits. Anyway, I'm able to detect and understand a lot of dynamism and humor in the Russian language, but I'm slow to generate it, in part because I just don't practice. I have very few Russian-speaking friends. Funny enough, most of them are Ukrainian, but they speak with me and each other in Russian. But of course, as I mentioned, this is slowly changing due to the war. But I tried to speak to the president in Russian so he would avoid needing an interpreter as much as possible. One of the things I want to improve for next time is to make sure I get very good equipment for interpretation and arrange for an interpreter I trust to be exceptionally good for the dynamism and the endurance of a 3-hour conversation in the style that I tried to do. Just to give you some behind the scenes details of the experience. So equipment wise, funny enough, it's not actually so trivial to set up wireless connections from.
I could believe that. English is not very friendly to variety in phrasing. I wish I knew enough Russian to tell you if I could agree or not, but I feel like from the little bit I know of Spanish and the basically nothing I know of Korean, I don't feel like I've ever felt like the English language lacks a variety in the way to phrase things. I feel like English has like an almost unlimited way to phrase things. And I thought I've heard it said casually. I don't know 100% with certainty, but I thought I've heard it said casually so many different times that English has so many words and so many synonyms and so much connotation and so many different ways to express a thing. But
from us, the two people talking to the interpreter, and then back to us in a way that's super robust and has clean audio.
English is more about vocabulary rather than phrasing. What do you mean by phrase? Isn't there a sentence? Am I crazy? I feel like there's a sentence. It's like a joke, but it illustrates the point. Isn't there a sentence with the word fuck in it like 5 times? And depending on which fuck you emphasize, it means something completely and totally different. What am I thinking of? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? There's a comedy skit. Is it this?
The hardest word in America has been the word I thought it's easy, that I know what means. But it turns out I didn't know shit. I think it's the most complicated word. Like, how can it be if something is bad, it's shit. If something is really good, it's the shit. I would have never guessed that. I had to study that. So important, the article. Like if I give you, that means that that I'm telling you off. But if I give shit, then I care.
I mean, you can do it with a simple sentence too. How are you today? Oh, versus how are you today? Versus how are you today? Versus how are you today? Sure, yeah. I don't know. I'm not buying that. But I don't speak Russian, so I still don't believe it though. I'm going to take a negative position on that until proven otherwise.
The audio I had in my ear from the interpreter had a loud background noise. So the whole time I'm hearing a shh sound with the voice of the interpreter coming in very quietly. What a wonderful experience this whole life is, frankly. Plus, his translation was often incomplete, at least for me, so I had to put together those puzzle pieces continuously. But again, it worked out, and hopefully our constant switching of languages and having a meta discussion about language provided good insights as to the complexity of this fight for a nation's identity and sovereignty that Ukraine is going through. Behind the scenes, off mic, on a personal level, President Zelensky was funny, thoughtful, and just a kind-hearted person. And really, the whole team were just great people.
There you go. Thank you. Sorry. I think this is what I was thinking of. This is it's a sentence where the sentence changes almost completely depending on which word is emphasized. I never said she stole my money. I never said she stole my money, with the implication meaning that someone else said it, but I didn't. I never said she stole my money. I simply did never say it. I never said she stole my money. I might have implied it in some way, but I never explicitly said it. I never said she stole my money. I just said someone took it. I didn't say it was she. I never said she stole my money. I just said she probably borrowed it. I never said she stole my money. I said she stole someone else's money. And I never said she stole my money. I said she stole something of mine, but not my money. Yeah. Fuck you guys. Don't hate on my language.
It was an experience I'll never forget. After the conversation was recorded, the next challenge was to translate all of this and overdub it and do it super quickly. Like, these words I'm speaking now have to be translated and dubbed into Ukrainian and Russian. 11 Labs were really helpful here, especially in bringing the president's voice to life in different languages. But even more than that, they're just an amazing team who inspired me and everyone involved. Please go support 11 Labs. They are a great company and great people. The translation is separate from the text-to-speech and was done in part by AI and a lot by human. This is where the fact that we had constant switching between 3 languages was a real challenge. So there are 6 transition mappings that have to be done. English to Ukrainian and Russian, Ukrainian to English and Russian, and then Russian to English and Ukrainian. Continuously, sentence by sentence, sometimes word by word. And each combination of language to language translation is best done by a person who specializes in that kind of mapping. So it was all a beautiful mess, all of it. And on top of all that, great translation is super hard. For example, I've read and listened to a lot of Dostoevsky in both English and Russian and studied the process of how these books are translated by various translators. You can spend a week discussing how to translate a single important sentence well. Obviously, in this situation, we don't have weeks. We have hours for the whole thing. One of the things I regret is not putting enough time into the hiring and selecting great translators from Russian and Ukrainian to English, especially. I think translation is an art. And so getting a good translator that works well with us is a process that needs more time and effort. I'll be doing that more this month. By the way, we have a small but amazing team. If you want to join us, go to lexfriedman.com/hiring. If you're passionate, work hard, and everyone on the team loves working with you, then we'll do some epic stuff together. We'd love to work with you. Like I said about 11 Labs, there are a few things as awesome in life as being able to work hard with an amazing team towards a mission all of us are passionate about. Anyway, I'll probably be doing a few more interviews in the Russian language. I do have a lingering goal of interviewing the mathematician Grigory Perelman, but there's also others. I will also work on improving my whole pipeline, both equipment-wise and interpreter-wise, in doing these conversations in other languages, because there are many that I would like to do in languages I don't speak at all, like Chinese, Mandarin, or Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, Portuguese, French, German. I see language as both a barrier for communication and a portal into understanding the spirit of a people connected by that language. It's all a weird and beautiful puzzle, and I'm just excited to get the chance to explore it. All right, I got a question on how I prepare for podcasts. So this has evolved and expanded more and more over time. There are some podcasts that I prepare hundreds of hours for. In AI terms, let's say, first, I'm training a solid background model by consuming as much variety on the topic as possible. A lot of this comes down to picking high signal sources, whether it's blogs, books, podcasts, YouTube videos, X accounts, and so on. For this conversation with President Zelensky, for example, since February 2022, I've spoken with hundreds of people on the ground. I've read Kindle or audiobook about 10 books fully, and then I skimmed about 20 more. And I don't mean books about Zelensky, although he does appear in some of them. I mean books where...
I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, it sounds mean, but I just don't believe it. What was a single question or a single thing that was brought up in this conversation that made it seem like we were illustrative, I think that's the word, right, of some kind of like deep knowledge of something more than just the most surface level knowledge ever of this conflict or of the country or of the history of it? Like, I don't know what it means when people say read a book. I don't know what that means anymore. I have no idea. I don't know what that even means.
This conversation was fully in the back of my mind as I'm reading the book. So, for example, I read Red Famine by Anna Applebaum. It's about Holodomor. Does it directly relate to Zelensky? Not on the surface, no, but it sort of continues to weave the fabric of my understanding of our people.
Like,
does it relate to Zelensky? Not on the surface, no, but it sort of...
where was most of the population? I don't know where, I don't know which parts of Ukraine were Russified at which points, but like, when, hold on. I'm so sorry.
I don't mean books about Zelensky.
Okay. My Soviet history is not the best. My history is not the best. It's a concept for Russia, okay, and it's called Russification, all right? You know how in the West, white people talk about how the United States does like cultural imperialism and all that shit. Okay. Imagine that, but like for real and not just with like white women with blue hair talking about it. So this can take the form of overthrowing government and installing your own dictators and then changing things like the language, changing things like the history. It could involve, like actually killing large amounts of people and shipping in your own citizens and giving them passports. It could involve taking away like a la like Moldova and Transnistria, right, which is like an independent territory in Moldova now. I think has like a lot of Russian citizens with passports. It could take the form of starving people in certain territories, like during the Holodomor, which I think impacted. I think it was Kazakhstan and Ukraine the most. I think it was those two, right? Russification is like a huge part of Russian history and the history of the countries around it that I'm pretty sure goes, I think it it precedes even the country of Russia and precedes even the Soviet empire. Like I think I'm pretty sure Ukraine has been fighting and the territories around Russia have been fighting since prior for like centuries, like over 400 or 500 years. Like I think there's been like tons of conflict. But my history before even of the Soviet Union is poor at best. Okay. I'm torching the bridge or any concept of a bridge ever. But like,
although he does appear in some of them. I mean, books where this conversation was fully it's mind as I'm reading the book. So, for example, I read Red Famine by Anna Applebaum. It's about Holodomor. Does it directly relate to Zelensky? Not on the surface, no, but it sort of continues to weave the fabric of my understanding of a people, of a history of the region. But it's really important for me to read books from various perspectives.
I don't understand how you could ever look at an event like the Holodomor and not even be able to draw at least a couple of relevant comparisons today to the idea that when people talk about ethnic Russians existing in Ukraine, or when people talk about a lot of people speaking Russian there, a lot of this, I'm pretty sure population replacement happened after the mass death and starvation of the Holodomor. I think, especially in Crimea, I think that's where a lot of their Russian population comes from. My history is so horrible here. It's been a long time now. But like, to say that like you've like, I don't know if it's even representative. To say that like you've read like this book on the Holodomor and you can't even like, well, does this really relate to anything today? No, not at all. Like, is it? I always want to say Tatar, but I think that's the raw meat you eat. The Tartars. I don't know how to pronounce people. I don't understand how you can't relate a single one of any of these things, of any of these historical facts to anything going on today, but then say that you've like read all these books on the conflict. That's just like that's an outstanding statement to me. That's an outstanding statement to me. Is it Tatar or is it Tatar? I don't know how you could ever make these statements together. I'm trying to think of an equivalent statement. For the United States. It's just like an unbelievable statement to make. This is just like an unbelievable statement to make. Tatar.
And I'm always trying to calculate the bias under which the author operates and adjusting for that in my brain as I integrate the information. For example, Anne Applebaum's book, Gulag, is very different from Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. The former is a rigorous, comprehensive historical account. The latter is a literary, psychological, and personal portrait of Soviet society. Both, I think, are extremely valuable. On the bias front,
I'm sorry, the bridge is totally burned.
Is very different from, for example, Anne Applebaum's book, Gulag, is very for that in my brain as I integrate the information. For example, Anne Applebaum's book, Gulag, adjusting for that in perspectives. And I'm always trying to calculate, but it's really important for me to read books from various perspectives. And I'm always trying to calculate the bias under which the author operates and adjusting for that in my brain.
Okay, these are statements. I need a name for these statements. I wish I had a name for these statements. There are things that sound good when you say them, but they're empty without any examples, right? You just say a thing and it's like I adjust for bias. Okay, that's a good statement, I guess, but what does that mean, right? Like you adjust for bias. Like, okay, that sounds fine. And then can we get an example? But he gives examples.
As I integrate the information. For example, Anne Applebaum's book, Gulag, is very different from...
Okay, so when he gives this book here, Gulag, a history, okay? So my guess is he's going to give a book written of a similar style, covering the same event, and then the comparison is going to be how, especially when it comes to history, okay, I'm giving you a very, 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 very surface level retard take here, but it's still better than every other retard on the internet, okay, because nobody's read literally fucking anything, apparently, okay? Usually in history, when it comes to a disagreement on things, it's not like there's, oh, I'm biased, so I think there were 4 nukes in Japan, or, oh, I'm biased, so I think generally it's going to be like an overemphasizing or a de-emphasizing of certain contributing factors to other things. Maybe it'll be like weighing some evidence that might be contentious or not over whether or not we think it's like a real thing or not. But very rarely is it going to be a totally separate retelling of facts. That's just generally in the academic discipline of history, it's generally is not the case. That is just a totally separate retelling of facts. It's generally not the case. Like if you were to talk about like the Irish potato famine and whether or not that was like engineered or whether or not it was an intentional genocide or whatever, and you're going to like the claim is not going to be were they actually selling potatoes when they were starving, right? Well, one side says they were, one side says they weren't. That's the debate. No, the question is like in the process of selling these things, like why was it happening? What were the different contributory factors? What were the market conditions? Why was stuff being shipped out? Like these are the arguments, and then you get into a lot of nuance and complicated weighing of what's going on here, right? So when we bring up this book, then the expectation is going to bring up another book of a similar style, meaning another like dispassionate, what would you call this? Like tertiary source, where you're sourcing other primary and secondary sources to create like a compilation thing or whatever. I don't know if you would consider this a secondary or tertiary writing, but you're going to compare it to something of that nature, right?
Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. The former is a rigorous, comprehensive historical account. The latter is a literary, psychological, and personal portrait of Soviet society.
These are not two different books that you weigh against each other. It doesn't sound like that.
Account. The latter is a literary, psychological, and personal portrait of Soviet society.
These don't sound like they're written about the same subject matter at all, almost. They might happen in the same area, and they might be a part of the same events, but it's not, it would be like saying, like, I'm trying to weigh the biases, so I read, you know, like Smith's compilation of, or Smith's telling of the Civil War in the United States, and I'm trying to weigh the biases in that against, you know, like Theodore's journey through Alabama, fighting in the Civil War, or whatever. Like these are, sorry, it's just these are just not great examples.
Both, I think, are extremely valuable. On the bias front, for example, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer is a good example. It is full of bias, but he was there, and to me, he has written probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest book on the Third Reich ever. But like I said, it has a lot of inaccuracies and biases. You can read about them online if you like. The greatest book on the Third Reich ever.
The greatest book in what way? Like in that it's the most factual, like I don't know what that means. Does he mean to say that it's, because, well, it must not be the most factually accurate because he's saying it has a lot of factual inaccuracies. Is it the most entertaining? Is it the one that summarizes their core beliefs the best? Is it the one that makes them look the best? Is it the one that captures some feeling or captures some state of human affairs or captures the, like, what do we mean by the one of the best ever?
There, and to me, he has written probably one of the greatest.
I have no idea what that means. I don't know.
Not the greatest book on the Third Reich ever. But like I said, it has a lot of inaccuracies and biases. You can read about them online if you like. But my job in this case, and in all cases, is to adjust based on my understanding of the author's biases and take the wisdom from the text where it could be found and putting the inaccuracies aside into the proverbial dustbins of history. So as I'm reading, I'm writing down my thoughts as they come up. Always digging
Post them. Which thoughts? Write them down. Or I'm sorry, post them. I'm so curious.
For some deeper insight about human nature. If I'm at my computer, I'll write it down in Google Doc. Sometimes use Notion or Obsidian. If I'm not at my computer, I'll use Google Keep. So for example, if I'm listening to an audiobook and I'm running along the river, if a good idea comes to mind, I'll stop, think for a few seconds, and then do speech to text note in Google Keep. By the way, listening to audiobook at 1x speed. Old school. And eventually I get a gigantic pile of thoughts and notes that I look over to refresh my memory. But for the most part, I just throw them out. It's a background model building process. By the way, LLMs are increasingly becoming useful here for organization purposes, but have not yet been useful, at least for me. And I do try a lot for...
What is Vera even supposed to take away from all this other than he name dropped some book? I don't know. It's not even like a good, it's just whatever.
Insight extraction or insight generation purposes. I should mention that my memory for specific facts, names, dates, quotes is terrible. What I remember well is high-level ideas. That's just how my brain works, for better or for worse.
I don't want to sound mean, and I know this is torched. I've torched this. Like, I just don't believe that's the case. I don't believe that my brain is so special and so exceptional. I'm the only person on the planet that can do this. I think that the reason why you don't remember names or dates or places is just because you don't actually read anything or study anything about it, because you have to know these things, right? And if anything, it just in my very, very little exploration of history, I feel like the names and the places are the things that sometimes stand out the most. Like these are some of the most important and awe-inspiring things. I'm sure for, I don't know fuck all about World War II, but even I know some of the places and shit. The fucking bombing of Dresden and all the civilians that ended up dying there, or storming the beaches of Normandy, or the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and the fucking fire bombings of Tokyo, and like all these like you know the places, and you'll know some of the dates, and you know the names of the people that involved. This doesn't make any sense. It's like, this has to be noticeable. Other people have to notice this. And you also, this stuff will stick in your brain because like you've read it and it makes sense because history happened. It's a real thing. There's a chronology to it. There are people and there are countries, and the way that they interact with each other makes sense because it literally happened. It actually happened. So they have to fit in. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm done ranting about this. I'm only being this much of a stickler because like he's expertised himself in this area. He said he read countless books. Now he said he's read 10 books, 10 full books on this. And you don't have a mind for any names, for any dates, for any countries. 10 full books, 10 full books. Maybe you should read 2 or 1. Just don't read 10 books. If you're not absorbing anything, if you're not absorbing a single thing from any of this, then why read any more at all? Maybe read a Wikipedia article, listen to a podcast at 0.75x speed, like
organization purposes, but have not yet been useful, at least for me. And I do try a lot for insight extract, and eventually I get a gigantic pile of thoughts and notes that I look over to refresh my memory. But for the most part, I just throw them out. It's a background model building process. By the way, LLMs are increasing along the river. If a good idea comes to mind, I'll stop, think for a few seconds.
I'm sorry, fuck, I'm so triggered. Listen, if you would have come to my stream 5 years ago, I said history sucks.
They come up, always digging for some deeper insight about human nature. If I'm at my computer and putting the inaccuracies aside based on my understanding of the proverbial dustbins of history. So as I'm reading, I'm writing down my thoughts as they come up, always digging for some deeper insight about human nature. If I'm at my computer, I'll write it down in Google Doc, sometimes use Notion or Obsidian. If I'm not at my computer, I'll use Google Keep. So for example, if I'm listening to an audiobook and I'm running along the river, if a good idea comes to mind, I'll stop, think for a few seconds, and then do speech to text note in Google Keep. By the way, listening to audiobook at 1x speed. Old school. And eventually I get a gigantic pile of thoughts.
So old school is actually just reading a book, but okay.
And notes that I look over to refresh my memory. But for the most part, I just throw them out. It's a background model building.
Oh, he throws out his notes? Why? Wait, why would you take an audio note and then throw the note out? He doesn't take any notes. He hasn't read any of these books. All of this was a meme. That was a joke, Destiny? Was it?
Process. By the way, LLM.
Or was the old school thing a joke? I couldn't tell because an audiobook might be old school compared to today if he's referencing like Wikipedia articles and podcasts. I don't know. I can't tell.
LLMs are increasingly becoming, for the most part, I just throw them out. It's a background model building process. By the way, LLMs are increasingly becoming useful here for organization purposes, but have not yet been useful, at least for me. And I do try a lot for insight extraction or insight generation purposes. I should mention that my memory for specific facts, names, dates, quotes is terrible. What I remember well is high-level ideas. That's just how my brain works, for better or for worse.
Okay, if this is the case, don't waste your time studying history and don't pretend to study history because you're not learning history at that point. The history is a collection of names and dates and places, and then a chronology and a story that relates these in some way. It could relate them through wars or diplomacy or marriages or domestic conflict. Or economics or trade. There's a million ways. Or religious, it's impossible to say I studied the history of some region and I just took a high-level idea away from it. What high-level idea? What does that even mean? You're not studying history at that point. I don't even know if that would count as philosophy. That's a 5-minute YouTube video. I don't understand what this means. When I study the history of a region, I don't remember any of the names, dates, places, or events. I just take away high-level ideas. What, like war is bad? That people can be greedy sometimes? That bad shit happens? What does that mean?
These quotes is terrible. What I remember well is high-level ideas. That's just how my brain works, for better or for worse. I realize that sometimes forgetting all of the details and the words needed to express them makes me sound simplistic and even unprepared. I'm not. But that's life. We have to accept our flaws and roll with them. Aside from books, I also listen to a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos where people are talking about the topic. So for the President Zelensky episode, I listened probably to hundreds of hours of content from his supporters and from his critics from all sides. Again, I choose...
What question was the high level question that came just because of his...
The number of soldiers.
Yes.
And the number of artillery rounds is not everything. As you have said, let's say Donald Trump guarantees security for 4 years. You can form partnerships with India, with Saudi Arabia that enforce punishment, the stick, on oil prices, for example, if any aggressive action is taken. You can actually even build, I've met a lot.
Okay, we've got sanctions. Would we put sanctions instead of having a security guarantee?
I have a dream that, let's say on January 25, or sometime at the end of January this year, you will sit down with Donald Trump, with Vladimir Putin, and together negotiate a ceasefire with strict security guarantees.
Fuck! Sorry, I'm so triggered by this. Okay. Here are some interesting questions that I think would have been interesting. I don't know that much about the history of this area. Okay. What is your explanation or your take? And I'm sure you have to showcase some of these ahead of time. Why did Minsk 1 and why did Minsk 2 fall apart, right? Why did the Minsk agreements fall apart between 1 and 2? Because some blame is given to each side obviously by Ukrainians and by Russians and by other observers for what happened here, right? You had ceasefires that were agreed upon. I believe especially the Minsk 2 one happened very closely to the seizure of I wish I could remember what the airport was or whatever, right? But like, why do you think some of these peace agreements fell? That would be like a specific question that would demonstrate that, like, oh, you're familiar with specifics of the conflict and you're familiar with a specific thing in the conflict, and then you can ask a specific question about the conflict. That would be like, oh, he's read something or studied this, okay? And these are like very, like, I don't know much about these, right? What, like, for Azov and the battalions, like, what were the military differences between the invasion into Crimea in 2014 versus the integrating all of the battalions into your military proper afterwards? How did Ukraine's economy develop? How did your military develop into a wartime military and economy? There must have been a lot of like challenges and difficulties there. It's not like you just randomly had a whole ass fucking army ready to fucking go, right? Disbanding all of the battalions and then like rolling them into the military proper, and the process for that, like, those could be interesting questions. When he talked about banning the Russian language, that stupid fucking talking point, how do you decide what is propaganda in your country? How do you decide which radio stations are from Russian oligarchs versus what is a general or a genuine opinion from a citizen in your country? Like, how do you even tease these two things apart? What do you think about the referendum held in Crimea? The fact that some people say that Putin himself says that the referendum in Crimea was an important referendum that showed that the Ukrainian people really did want to secede from Ukraine, or in the Donbass, the little green men, the people that were there when they were doing the separatist voting in Donetsk and Luhansk. There are a million other questions like this, okay, that could be asked with my like very, very, very limited, very, very, very limited knowledge, okay, of this conflict. I have read 0 books on Ukraine, to be honest, none. I don't understand what question there was asked here, or what part of the conversation was like, oh shit, he's like really expertise in this region, and I can tell because of this question, because of the knowledge that he's showing here, because of the engagement he has with Zelensky. I'm sorry, this whole thing drives me insane. I hate this like aesthetic of intelligence, this aesthetic of like, I'm learned and educated and I'm coming at this from a very critical, knowledgeable point of view. And it's like, these are just like Twitter talking points. This was like this is like a bot trained on Twitter comments, like given interview form. That's it. I'm done. Okay.
For Paul Rosalie, round 2. Especially, I literally went deep into the jungle with Paul and like preparing for Rick Rubin process for, and then say that it's X hours per episode is not accurate, because a lot of this preparation transfers from one guest to another, even when there's an insane level of variety in the guests. We're all humans after all. There is a thread that connects all of it together somehow, if you look closely enough. For more technical guests in STEM fields, I'll read papers, a lot of papers, and also technical blog posts and technical tweet threads. This is a very different process. For AI or CS related topics, I will run other people's code. I will write my own, implement stuff from scratch. If it's a software company, I'll use their tools and software if relevant. But in the actual conversation, I constantly am searching for simple but profound insights at various levels of abstraction. Sometimes this means asking a trivial question.
Levels of abstraction can only appreciably happen when you understand the underlying material. Anything else is guesswork. I don't give a fuck what an uneducated person's abstraction is of a material that they can't abstract from. What do you think abstraction means? What you're talking about is not an abstraction. What you're talking about is a base level engagement with the subject matter because you can't fully grasp it. Like, imagine me trying to redesign fucking Agile or some bullshit because of my abstraction. Like, yeah, I don't really know any programming and I don't know any formal management systems and I don't actually know how any of these larger projects work. But like, I know a lot of jokes about GitHub and Scrum Masters, so I feel like I could probably, it would immediately be like, why would I even give a fuck what your abstraction is when you can't even explain the underlying material, let alone critically engage with it? Like,
in hopes of uncovering the non-trivial, counterintuitive but fundamental idea that opens the door to a whole new way of looking at the field. And actually, every guest is their own puzzle. Like preparing for Rick Rubin was me listening to hundreds of songs he produced and even learning some on guitar, like Hurt by Johnny Cash. Preparing for the Cursor team episode meant, obviously, I had to use Cursor fully for several weeks, all of its features. So I switched completely from VS Code to Cursor. For Paul Rosalie, round 2 especially, I literally went deep into the jungle with Paul and almost died, fully taking the leap toward adventure with him. When it gets close to the conversation, I'll start working on the actual interview questions and notes. And there I'm asking myself, what am I personally curious about? Like, I love podcasts. I'm a big fan of many, many podcasts. And so I ask myself, what would I want this person to explain on the podcast? And maybe what aspect of their thought process or their humanity would I want to be surfaced or have the chance to be surfaced? In the actual conversation, I always try to put my ego aside completely and do whatever it takes to have a good conversation and serve the listener. This means asking questions simply, trying to define terms and give context if needed, being open-minded, vulnerable, curious, and challenging the guest when needed. Despite the claims on the internet, I do ask a lot of challenging questions, including follow-ups, but always with empathy. I don't need to be right. I don't need to signal my moral or intellectual superiority to anyone. I try to do the opposite, actually, because I want the guest to open up, and I trust the intelligence of the listener to see for themselves if the guest is full of shit or not, to detect the flaws and the strengths of how the guest thinks or who they are deep down. A lot of times when interviewers grill the guest, it doesn't reveal much except give a dopamine hit to the echo chambers who hate the guest. As I said in the intro, I believe the line between good and evil does run through the heart of every man. The resulting conversations are sometimes a failure. Sometimes because they're too short, sometimes because the chemistry was just not working, sometimes because I fucked it up. I try to take risks, give it everything I got, and enjoy the roller coaster of it all, no matter what. And as I said, I trust the listener to put it all together, and I trust the critic to tear it apart. And I love you all for it. All right, I got a bit of a fun question. It's a long one. So Delian, cool name, wrote in saying he spotted me out in the wild and had a question about it. He wrote, I saw Lex working at the Detroit airport between flights. I hesitated and ultimately decided not to interrupt since he was in focus mode. True. Lex had his headphones earbuds on, listening to brown noise. Microsoft Surface propped up at eye level, Kinesis Advantage keyboard on the table. The use of Microsoft Windows is surprising, but it has been discussed in the past. True. The ergonomics of the setup, Surface at eye level, means that Lex cares about his health. But the anomalously large Kinesis Advantage keyboard seems like such a burden to lug around airports. I cannot help but ask, why is it that Lex is going through the hassle to bring this absolutely large keyboard with him as carry-on? It barely fits in a backpack. Carrying it around must be necessary for Lex for some reason. I love the puzzle of this, that you're trying to think through this. The pain of lugging this tool around must be much smaller than the problem it solves for him. Question mark. What problem does this keyboard solve? What makes it necessary at the airport? Productivity? Health? RSI? Good questions. Thank you, Delia. Great question. It made me smile, so I thought I'd answer. I remember that day. There was something else about that day aside from the keyboard that I miss. So I am filled with a melancholy feeling that is appropriate for the holiday season. So let me try to set the melancholy feeling aside, answer a question about my computer setup when I'm traveling. So whether I'm going to SF, Boston, Austin, London, or the front in Ukraine, I am always bringing the Kinesis keyboard. I don't have RSI or any other health issues of that kind that I'm aware of, even though I've been programming, playing guitar, doing all kinds of combat sports my whole life, all of which put my hands in.
Oh, real quick, because again, I want to chat. Go support my tweet, okay, so that I can grill Zelensky and destroy Ukraine, okay? I think this is his comms, I think his internet comms guy, or his comms advisor. There you go. Like and retweet. I love you. Hi, what's up?
Oh, hello?
Hey, what's up? How's it going?
I have to contain myself. I have so much to say, and I don't want to be for 3 hours. But just I did listen to his explanation about the language thing.
Mhm.
So I just watched Zelensky's bit with him, like in original without the dub, with the AI dub, for my week panel, because Wick invited me to talk about this.
Mhm.
So
Just
I
for clarity, you speak fluent Russian and Ukrainian?
yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
And sort of English, as you noticed. So is one thing though. I watched it with you just now, together, and it's such bullshit. It's such bullshit. Let me start. I'm a translator, like as a profession right now. So I work. What I do is exactly what he says is barely possible to do. Apparently, I juggle usually Ukrainian, Russian, and English. So those are the three most common languages that Ukrainian will know. especially a translator. And right now, there is zero shortage of professional translators and interpretation people in Ukraine. As you can probably know why, because there's a bunch of journalists that are doing interviews with people who are foreigners. I did them with like smaller streamers, like, Dylan, Devin. I did them for The Economist, for example, people, people like of the big legacy journals, all sorts of people, right?
Yeah.
And usually what I do is I'm there, right? And I am interpreting live back and forth. So the questions to the person, and then what they say in the short form, and then afterwards I do the full transcript subtitles, right, of the Russian or Ukrainian bits, and then when I finish it, and then I present it to the person who asked for it as a job, right, and then they make either just subtitles or they make dub over those human-made subtitles, right, by me or someone else, right?
Yeah.
And he is talking with the president.
Yeah, if it's not like this is like it's not like this is a live conversation that's like, on the front lines where like time is of the essence. Like this is a prepared interview where you've got all the time in the world, and you've got like it's just a little silly, yeah.
And we can do it on the literal front line. Yeah. I did that shit in fucking Chasiv Yar, okay? Like at the front line, we can do it there. Then he can fucking do it in Kiev. With United 24, for example, is a media that is Zelensky's essentially media thing, right? Media platform. Do you think there are no people there who can do a translation, a proper one? Are we for real right now?
The only difference could be if, and I heard this wasn't the case, but I can't judge it. That's what I'm going to say. The only exception I could see is if it was the case that Lex was like incredibly fluent in Russian and then could express like the full gamut of. Okay, then that would be the only way I could see this being kind of acceptable.
I actually tried to be as charitable as humanly possible, not to let my personal dislike, influence me. So when that whole controversy happened, when he made this public tweet, essentially pressuring unironically Zelensky to do the Russian interview in Russian, and so many people were like, "Oh, Ukrainians got ass paint," as you probably imagine. Like a lot of people got like, "Oh, those fucking Ukrainians, they just they're so triggered. Why can't they do it in Russian?" All of that, right? So there was a lot of conversation about that, and I was like, "Well, if we like look at this in a vacuum." Like remove all context, the history, how important it is to preserve Ukrainian language, all of that, remove all of that, right? And just in vacuum, two people like know the language, right? And they can speak. The flow of the conversation will be sort of like as Lex said, the best as it can be in a language that both people speak fluently, right?
Sure, yeah.
So I gave him the benefit of the doubt that was his intent. But, of course, you cannot remove the fucking context, especially right now, when Ukrainian language is prohibited again in occupation. People are thrown in basements right now for speaking Ukrainian, okay? This is not the time. We cannot afford. He is a president. If I was speaking to Lex, for example, I could speak with him in English, first of all, fuck you. And second of all, if I could afford to speak with him in Russian, I could, right? I'm just a regular person. Zelensky is a face of a nation that is fighting right now to be Ukraine. Okay, he can his approval rating will drop like 30% if he spoke in Russian in this interview. It's just absolutely like, and he knows it. Let's not pretend that he doesn't know it. He's acknowledging it himself in the fucking video itself, that there is that language is important, that it's a sensitive topic in Ukraine, to put it mildly. He knows it. So why the hell didn't he say that in DMs, for example, with Zelensky team? No, he made a public Twitter. He made it for everyone to see and discuss for a week after Zelensky agreed to an interview, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's just there is like this, and his language ended up he speaks Russian about as well as Zelensky speaks English. Okay, so I wouldn't say it's awful, but it's definitely not what I would say fluent. So what the fuck, man? Like, it would have been the same difference if he spoke English all the time. Like it's just it was a fucking power move, okay? I will not back down from this. It was a power move. He tried to pressure him to essentially, and all the excuses as well. Like he was like, "Oh, the Russians will hear you. They already heard us."
Yeah.
Zelensky addressed them in Russian like bajillion times for entire year of the war. He addressed people. He made addresses in Russian towards Russians. All of us did. We have Telegram channels that we talk all of us in Russian. They still are in our fucking chats, okay, Russians.
Mhm.
So it's just the east of Ukraine speaks Russian. We all know it. So it's absurd. They heard all of it. Nothing new will be achieved with this fucking interview. Okay, American audience, sure, right? Yeah, that might be important, right, for the American audience to hear it, but they will not listen to it in Russian.
Mhm. Yeah,
or
I
in
was a
Ukrainian.
little.
They will listen.
I was wholly unconvinced. It's also bad too because like I can't speak as much to an Eastern thing, but in the West, like for us, like language is just language. But like if you know anything about Ukraine and Russia and the weird like cultural signaling that Putin has done around like Ukraine and Russia and like the long lost deep brothers and everything, like yeah, it just seems it's such a
Just
touchy subject.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm reiterating a lot of what you said. Yeah, the idea that like, okay, let's have the Ukrainian leader now speak in Russian because we are all brothers and we all do have peace and love. And, like, yeah, it's just such a weirdly cringe. Yeah, ugh. Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah. By the way, you asked you not asked that you like contemplated essentially like when the language thing started to be a problem. It started to be a problem in 1863. Okay, in 1863 was the first law of the prohibition of Ukrainian language by Russian Empire.
Mhm.
So it's a long thing, okay? It's a centuries long thing. And the preservation of Ukrainian language in Ukrainian identity has been basically the crux, the whole point, the essence, okay, of this entire struggle. Of them executing our writers, of our poets, of them prosecuting the language, of them prohibiting language or to be books to be published, schools to be teaching it, of them trying to basically every trick in the book to try to eliminate the language. Okay,
Mhm.
and they succeeded in some parts of the of the country, and there has been a revival of the Ukrainian language, which is great, obviously, right? Because in Belarus, for example, they killed it, the language,
Yeah.
Belarusian, I mean. Yeah, so it's just it's so fucking it's not even tone deaf because it would be tone deaf if he wasn't a fucking Russian himself.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no, yeah, that's true. Yeah. And if he hadn't read 10 books on it and skimmed numerous others and listened to hundreds of hours of, yeah.
Oh fuck me, dude. It's just so I will not, if that was like some sort of like a Joe Rogan person, I don't know, like that for some reason I don't know, doesn't make sense. That but I talked with actually like one British dude who is a journalist, and he knows Russian relatively well, but he's not Russian. He just learned it for the work he was doing. So I could that would be one thing, but this person is also Russian. like he presents himself as Ukrainian, and I suppose his like grandparents were in Kiev, but he was born in Tajikistan, and then he spent all of his time in Moscow, and then he moved to United States. Okay, it's just
It's
like,
also weird too. You got like it's also weird too, and I don't know his history as much, but I imagine it's a bit different to say that like, oh, like my family's background and everybody was like born in Ukraine and all of this when they were also born into the Soviet Union. Like I feel like the relationship is going to be a bit different there as well, right? If you're born into the Soviet Union and then he grew up in, did you say Moscow and Petersburg or Moscow and somewhere else? Like it's just it feels like a lot of the time there's a lot of the trying to like buy credit and everything, and it's like it feels really stupid.
Yeah, they also use it only when it's fucking convenient. Like for example, that fucking kissing dude, he was like, "Oh, I have a family." He's in Russia. He was born in Russia. He was born in Moscow. He lived in
that guy.
Okay, he's not Ukrainian. Yeah, but he then was like, "Oh, I have family like that is in Ukraine. Fucking settlers in Crimea." Okay, so it's just it's just extremely, and I'm so over people thinking that's like naivety, or it's like some sort of like silliness, weak, with all my love to weak. Okay, but I didn't even know it when I went to the panel, but he was like, what, it's stupid, he should do an interview with Russian. He said it weak, like apparently I didn't even know it, like because Lex is such a great guy apparently, and he couldn't have a bad intent.
Yeah, but then also there has to be like some level of responsibility. There can't be naivety as well, right? One thing that I don't like, I've had this conversation in real life a couple times recently, at least in the West, there's this huge divorce between politics and the real world. And it's like politics is kind of just like a game and a joke, and it's just like content, and it's just like fun stuff to talk about. But it's like you're having like a conversation with the actual real life president of a country that is actually in a real life war right now, where people are actually real life dying, like in war. Like this, it's not just like a YouTube video where you're going for maximum engagement on. So it can't just be like, oh, I'm naive and I didn't know anything. Like that's the fact that you even have this level of access is like insane. And to take it for granted to do content is just very weird. And that, yeah, I don't know.
True that, but also like he presents himself as someone who's like an expert, sort of. Like
yeah, exactly.
He
he expertises himself. Yeah, the ethnic, the familial background, all the books, all the yeah.
And there's a lot of subtle things that it's difficult to pick up for Americans, I suppose, who don't know all the. For example, the thing that he did with the language, that the Russian language is so much better for communication because it's a melodic, emotional. Okay, it's a superior language. You don't know this meme, obviously, because you're American. But that's one of the most central memes in Russia. That English is inferior. It's the language of the sellers, and it's the language of the inferior variety, because in Russian is the language of poets, of Pushkin or whatever the fuck, Kuyushkin, all of this. But English is inferior. It has been something I heard so much growing up. For example, like cultural figures like Zadornov, he's like a comedian and a political person, like a social commentator in Russia. He's dead, I believe, right now. He's of old age, but he was like doing entire like performances based around how fucking retarded and stupid English is, and how glorious and like aristocratical and filled with feeling and sound and music Russian languages. So it's also like basically a meme what he did there. So you probably won't know it, but there was like even this meme that Russians said they can't watch movies in original because Russian dub is just so superior.
Nice. Okay.
Like it always made me like my face would like cringe, because it's just so. First of all, like actors obviously are better than fucking dub people. Okay, like in most cases, like actors perform better if you listen to them speak in the actual language they speak in, right? And second of all, Russian dub was shit. It was always shit. It was incredibly. It was horrible translation. Like absolutely lost just the plot of the movie when you listen to Russian translation. But they always said that they don't want to scar their ears, okay, with that dog speak, okay. So that's also a meme. Like it's a complete and utter crap. If you know the language, you can express yourself well in it, no matter what. Like obviously, I can express myself probably a bit better in Russian because of the it's my original language. But yes, if you're like a professional translator, you can make this connection between the languages easy. So yeah, it's pretty fucking horrible and dumb, and I'm shook people still don't understand all of that. But also when he was like asking questions, like you pointed it out, thank fuck, at least you see it. I was like borderline removing tears. I'm like, someone understands that he asked all the memes, all the questions that are propaganda about about the martial law, for example. That's one of the biggest memes, right? That like Zelensky is actually a dictator, and he's throwing those poor Ukrainians to die for his own gain on the front lines. That's like the biggest like thing, right? And he asked that in a polite way, in a gentle way, okay? But that's
even past the just. Like it would even be better to ask, like, do you want to talk about martial law maybe or something like that, rather than to like assume that it's already been passed in like, because as soon as you say that, especially to Western audiences, like that's like the worst thing in the world, especially to Americans, like martial law, holy shit, all the freedoms are gone. And then to pretend like there's some conflict between martial law as it's laid out constitutionally in a time of war versus freedom. And it's like, what? Like, yeah, I don't know. This whole thing is...
The implication
is that he's fighting against freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, that he's not actually the democratic president, that he's not actually about the democracy and freedom and liberation, because he, as you know, and did a martial law. Okay.
Yeah.
This is the most retarded point, because excuse me, like I know like most of Americans didn't actually like know about fighting in World War II, but nobody asked my grandparents, okay, whether they want to go to fight Nazis or not. They weren't asked. Their opinion wasn't asked, and there wasn't even an age limitation. Everyone was fucking thrown at the front, like 18, whatever the fuck, right? Barely born alive, go to the front, dude, right? Nobody asked. Our actual martial law is 10 times gentler than it usually is in situations like this. So it's so fucking annoying. We haven't even removed the age limit from 25.
And it's
just,
and the way that the way that framing goes too is it's always presented as though like basically like, why do you guys keep like doing this? Is so retarded. Like, why don't you just like stop fighting like this war? Like, it's just like such an obviously stupid thing to be fighting a war, and it's so dumb. And like, why don't you just stop? Like, you know that people are dying, right? Are you stupid? Like, why are you fighting a war? Like Ukraine just chose it.
Dude, it's just unbearable. It's so stuck and stupid. Like it's just the same thing with the elections, right? That's also a big meme.
Oh yeah, like why did you put And then like, who do you think is going to win in the next elections? LOL. Like, do you think you're going to win the debate? LOL. And it's like, that we're like, it's like a war right now, right? Like there's like people like probably dying, like literally right now. It's like, this is a real thing. Are you going to come to the inauguration? LOL. Like, I don't know. It just feels like it felt like a fucking meme. It felt like a meme interview to me. Yeah. Holy fucking shit.
Election is also that like thing about him being like the dictator, because I have been told so much, like by bots, by Russian bots, like by MAGAs, by all sorts of people, leftoids, like all sorts of people essentially, right? That repeat Russian propaganda one way or the other. They would be like, oh, you don't even have like democracy. I'm like, no shit, genius, bled. Sorry, Russian. Russian anger.
Breaking out the Dota 2 vocab. Okay.
Yeah, it is the vocab. Okay. I am from Kharkiv. Okay. I am the poor Russian speaker that Putin came to defend. He defended my father spectacularly. Okay. But point is that it's just so like. Obviously we want to obviously we fought for that on Maidan, right? Me personally, to have democracy, to have proper laws and institutions working, but it's not fucking our fault that Russia invaded us and we have to suspend all of that shit. Like why is it how much money do you want to bet that Lex will not ask Putin about fucking him throwing people at the front?
Yeah, that was my question was going to be like, are you going to ask Putin, hey, Putin, when are you going to hold fair elections? Because I said I would walk back all of my criticism of Lex. If he actually asks those types of questions of Putin, I'd be like, you know what? Fine, I'll give him a pass on it. If he would actually ask Putin, yeah, when are you going to... So people have accused you of like cracking down on freedoms a lot. What happened to Navalny? What was going on there? Yeah, but...
And all the other people, Nemtsov, who got killed and shot and thrown. You know what? Actually, probably Lex shouldn't ask those questions, because I don't want him to fly off the window. So,
jeez, yeah.
Actually, when we were having the panel with Mercado, Andrew brought it up that his friend, journalist, actually tried to ask Putin some questions and was taken to another room, and they beat him. That's pretty typical for Russia, but it's just Lex it shouldn't probably ask any provocative language or any provocative questions, because it's fucking Russia. Okay, you can get all sorts of shit happen to you. Never mind the fact they can just be used there, stuck there, and used as a bargaining chip or some shit. Like it's obviously they will have to coordinate every single fucking thing.
Sounds like you don't believe in peace and love, but okay.
I mean, yeah, I believe in hate, apparently. Why hate when you can love, okay? Also, every time he said, I have a dream, I died inside a little bit. But other than that, I like how Zelensky is like, listen, so this is for 15 minutes, like, right? This is why Minsk failed because this, and that. This is why the negotiations with Russia are useless. This is why the guarantees need to be like NATO, because otherwise every other assurances we got didn't really give us anything because this, and that. Normandy, Budapest Memorandum, like actual dates, actual like events, actual like, facts and logic and facts, so to speak. And Lex then doesn't address any of that.
Or engage with any of it. Yeah, the lack of engagement on the questions was so fucking annoying.
And he's like a fucking NPC with a dialogue tree. He's like, I have a dream, though, that you, Putin, and Trump will sit down and make peace. Every time, like literally every time. Also, people say he's not, doesn't know what he's doing, but I don't know if you noticed that, but I really noticed that. Oh, there was like this one moment when he asked about the most retarded question of the entire interview, in my opinion, was about Putin loving his country. And Zelensky, kind of chuckled and then proceeded to say, like, how the fuck does where is his country, first of all? Where does it end? Where does it stop? Because he considers Ukraine his country,
Yeah.
And second of all, like, he's thrown more than 500,000 people to fucking die in Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
And how the fuck is that love? And Chechen people, that hundreds of thousands of people that were butchered in 2 wars, like how's that love exactly? Like, and he brings up all of that, and then he finishes Zelensky with the weakest point of everything he said prior, which was him not going to the front, not going to anywhere to Russia, not visiting like Russia, not even caring about it. But in Ukrainian, you can understand that he actually meant that Putin doesn't even give a fuck. He doesn't live like Moscow or anything. All the like bumfuck.
Well, he did leave Moscow. He did leave Moscow once, remember?
Well, Prigozhin, you
mean? To run away from him. Yeah, he did leave them.
Bravest dictator, yeah. So thing is, he brings it up, like that he doesn't really, and Lex launches into it. This last bit does not address Chechen thing, does not address throwing 500,000 people on the front, does not address his anything, but addresses this last bit by saying, I think Trump loves his country, but he hasn't been like everywhere. And you're like,
yeah, it's just stupid. It's just dumb. Like, we have like limited time. Yeah, I don't know. It's whatever. It's dumb, but yeah. Okay, there's a couple of things I have to run through. I have to leave like pretty soon because I have a dinner that I'm doing tonight.
Okay, no problem.
No. Are there any other big points you remember? What did you go over on the WIC panel that you thought was like the biggest stuff?
I mean, we mostly just talk about which points like we didn't really appreciate, and also we made some predictions about Putin interview. It wasn't like that big of a. Mostly it was like friendly because I was Dylan, me, and Andrew, and we were all like Ukraine dudes. So it wasn't really like we just Vic was the biggest like Lex fan there, but we tried to not to shit on him too much, obviously. I'm glad it happened though. Yeah. So it's not like I'm against it. Yeah.
Do you think that Lex will actually get an interview with Putin?
Maybe, but kind of depends on how this whole situation goes. Like, I think they will look how this went, and maybe they will like his interview with Zelensky. Who knows? But I think it would make sense for them to agree, because he can just sit there looking profound and soulful, and ask deep questions about Papa Putin and Mama Putin and his childhood or some shit, and it can be like all like that. And problem with Putin though is that even if Zelensky asks him the softest questions imaginable, for example, like Tucker Carlson, right?
Yeah.
Tucker didn't ask like literally anything. Putin is still can go on his unhinged Rurik in 1918 rant, right? So he can still go about like the ancient history he made up, and I just don't know how it will measure, because whatever you want to say about Zelensky, he came up, in my opinion, as a very human and like a real person, like approachable and kind of like likable, like like a person, right? With Putin is like a dead fucking shark. Like he's like a literal ghoul. He cannot come off as approachable or like a relatable or like a real person at all. So I'm like, he doesn't even care about anything American, really. Like,
Yeah.
Zelensky at least spoke about like Trump, about fucking Elon, about lobbying. Apparently, MAGAs really liked that bit when he talked about.
Yeah. Although Putin's in a
Trump.
Putin's in a weirder spot, I guess, because Putin's not even trying to appear or appeal to the West. I guess he just needs to appeal to Trump personally somehow. So yeah, but
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. You also one thing you said, I'm not sure exactly what you meant. You said like in the East, people are more pro-Russian, and what did you mean? You said like
I think
the
isn't it
people
like a
are
higher
more,
concentration of Russian speakers, or a higher concentration of people with slightly more favorable views towards Russia in Crimea and then in eastern Ukraine, and then as you go more west,
well, they
it's
used
more
to be.
sure. Yeah, I know those numbers
They
have
used to
changed
be,
after the
but
war has gone down, but
yeah. But there's like also another issue, like for example, before 22, I would say like with full chest, yes, even despite 2014. Crimea, definitely, the most people are Russian there, so it's another thing. But in Donbass, still the majority of people didn't want to go to Russia. There's no proof of that anywhere, and also they, of course, their opinion significantly fucking changed in Kharkiv, for example. Like people were more sympathetic to Russia. I wouldn't say they were like pro-Russian exactly, but a lot of people were like, yeah, Russia, Russia, it's positive relations, right? And now it's like drastically fucking negative because we haven't slept for 3 years and we are bombed every day. So, it's just kind of difficult to like them at this point, never mind the mass graves and all of that shit, which, by the way, Lex didn't ask about and,
Yeah.
of course, didn't visit.
Yeah.
In his video, he visited Babin Yar, which is all right. He's a Jewish person, so that, makes sense to visit. By the way, Russians fucking bombed Babin Yar, but he didn't say anything about it. The memorial to Jewish people who were killed by Nazis. He didn't say that Russians bombed it, but whatever, doesn't matter. He visited that, but he, of course, didn't visit mass graves in Izium or like in Bucha or some shit. He didn't visit places where Russians committed crimes. He just went specifically to talk about the history of World War II, which
the
is
least controversial. Yeah.
Quite interesting. But yeah, well, anyway, you're right though, but because there is a problem, of course, because most people who escaped now, like of the 10 million people, right, that are now not living where they used to, most of them left either to Ukraine, other parts of Ukraine, or they left to like abroad somewhere, right? Poland or some shit, Germany, and things like that. So it leaves a problem, of course, of people who have stayed, why they stayed exactly, right? Some of them are just, stubborn assholes that don't want to leave. Some of them were afraid to leave. Some of them couldn't leave because of the shelling, and there was no green corridors available because Russia wouldn't allow it. Or they're waiters, as we call them, right? So people who are waiting for Russia to win as well. So there's that. Also, Russians like brought up thousands upon thousands of people of theirs already. They deported like 100,000 people from Melitopol and brought just about the same number of Russians there right now. We know that for sure. So that's the question as well. Like, what the fuck do you do with these motherfuckers? Like, they're there already, like deport them or some shit. Like, it's quite difficult to think about it, but it's also stupid because we have to take that back first.
Yeah.
And then think about all of that, I suppose. But yeah, it's, it's a situation, let's say. Yeah. Also, he didn't say a word about the fact that Zelensky brought up. How the fuck are we arranging elections without 10 million people being able to vote? Nothing.
Because of the people who are out of the country or whatever.
Yes, because 8 million are migrated, right? You have a couple millions in occupation. You have also 1 million in the army right now serving. So how the fuck those people are going to vote exactly? Like it's we don't have like internet voting or anything, so you have to do this new whole thing, like new administrative thing, right, to make it work. And do I even want to? Like on one hand, sure, but on the other hand, maybe the new elected people will be shit, at conducting war and diplomacy and things like that. And in times like this, I'm not like the biggest Zelensky simp on earth, to be honest, but I'm not sure I want someone else because I know he's at least doing a pretty solid job of it, whatever you think of him, right? So that's a big risk that is probably not the best time to take such risks. And how do you even do it? Like, do you vote underground so they don't bomb people while they're voting?
Yeah,
like
there's probably a reason why elections can be postponed during wartime, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know, like, man, seriously, it was annoying as shit, but I'm glad it happened. Because I think Zelensky did quite good, and I think it was a good showing. And apparently, some Magas were very happy that he said Trump is strong and Kamala is weak, and they really loved that part. So maybe that helped us. I don't know.
All right. Well, I will talk to
Well, yeah.
you another day. Be careful. Stay safe. Okay.
Yeah. Bye.